The door had not been opened in a long time. You could tell by the way the rust had fused the bottom track to the concrete, by the small puff of pressurized air that escaped like a held breath finally released. Margaret Calloway gripped the handle with both hands, planted her feet on the cracked asphalt of the storage yard, and pulled. The metal groaned, then it gave. Light entered the unit the way light enters a church, slowly, reverently, in a single long wedge of pale gold that pushed back the dark and revealed, inch by inch, what had been waiting inside. The smell hit her first, cedar, old and warm and dry beneath everything else, and underneath the cedar something older, old paper, old cloth, old time, the smell of decades folded into a room no larger than a garden shed. She did not move for a moment. She just stood at the threshold and let her eyes adjust. There were boxes stacked along the left wall, some of which had collapsed under their own weight. There was a broken wooden shelf that had half fallen from its bracket and now leaned against the back wall at a tired angle. There was a rolled carpet, water-stained at one end, and a brass floor lamp with no shade, and a cardboard box with the word kitchen written on it in black marker, in handwriting that had once been careful and deliberate. And in the back corner, barely visible in the slant of November light, there was a wooden crate. It was the crate that stopped her breathing. She could not have said why exactly. It was only a wooden box, sealed with a metal clasp gone green with age, half hidden behind a pile of folded curtains. But something in the way it sat there, solid, patient, indifferent to everything that had happened in the world outside for the last 15 or 20 years, made her hands go very still at her sides. She would not know for another hour what was inside it. She would not know for another 3 weeks what it meant. But later, years later, when she tried to describe that moment to her daughter, she would say that she already knew something, on some level below language, the way you sometimes know, before the phone rings, that the call is going to change your life. She stood in the doorway of Unit 49, in the cold November morning at the edge of Harlan, Georgia, and she breathed. However, to understand what this moment meant, we must go back to the beginning. Harlan, Georgia, is the kind of town that doesn't appear in travel guides and doesn't need to. It sits in the southwestern corner of the state, halfway between Valdosta and nowhere in particular, where the land flattens out into long stretches of pine forest and red clay fields, and the occasional rusted water tower with a town name painted on it in letters that the weather has been slowly erasing for 30 years. The main street is 4 blocks long. There is a hardware store, a diner with a handwritten menu on a chalkboard, a barbershop with the same candy-striped pole it has had since 1968, and a Dollar General that arrived a decade ago and immediately became the most frequently visited building in town. The Baptist church sits at one end of Main Street. The post office sits at the other end. Everything in between is a negotiation between memory and time. In late November, Harlan wears its cold like an old coat, familiar and not entirely comfortable. The leaves are long past their color, and what's left of them is brown and brittle and scattered across sidewalks and parking lots, catching in the wheel wells of pickup trucks and skittering across asphalt when the wind comes through. The sky is the color of old pewter. The air smells of wood smoke and pine, and the particular damp chill that settles into a place when the sun doesn't climb very high anymore. 2 miles east of the center of town, on a stretch of state highway that also contains a tire shop and an unused motel, sits Harlan Self-Storage. It is not a place that announces itself with any grandeur. The sign is a simple painted rectangle on a wooden post, faded to the color of old cream. Behind it runs a long row of corrugated metal storage units, perhaps 40 in total, their doors painted once in battleship gray and not since. The paint has peeled in long strips, and where it has peeled, the metal beneath has gone orange with rust. The padlocks are old. The gravel in the lot is thin and uneven, more dirt than gravel in places, and it shifts and crunches underfoot like coarse sugar. On the morning of November the 17th, there were perhaps 20 people standing in that gravel lot, their breath visible in the cold morning air, their hands in their pockets or wrapped around paper cups of coffee from the gas station 2 miles up the road. The auctioneer, a man named Harold Beaumont, 63 years old, with a red-checked flannel jacket and the fast, melodic voice of a man who has been doing this for 30 years, stood on a small metal step stool with a clipboard in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. Behind him, the row of metal doors stretched into the pale morning light like a sentence that hadn't finished. This was where it began. Her name was Margaret Louise Calloway, and she was 37 years old, and she was standing at the very edge of the crowd in a way that said, clearly, that she was not entirely sure she was allowed to be there. She was not a small woman, but she had learned over the past several years to take up less space than she occupied, to hold herself in, to stay at the perimeter, to be careful. You could see it in the way she stood, shoulders level, chin up, the particular straight-backed posture of someone who has decided that dignity is the one thing that cannot be taken from her, no matter what else goes. She wore a dark green canvas jacket that had been good once, years ago, and was still serviceable, though the stitching at the left collar had come loose and been resewn with thread that was almost but not quite the same color. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her face was weathered not by age, but by a year that had required more from her than any year had a right to ask. In the front pocket of her jeans was a single $5 bill, folded in quarters. It was the last money she had in the world. Here is what Margaret Calloway's life had looked like, until recently. For 11 years, she had been married to a man named Kevin Garrett, a man who had not always been the way he ended up. When she married him in the white-steepled church on the edge of Harlan, he had been attentive and funny, and the kind of man who remembered how she took her coffee without being reminded. The change came gradually, the way a slow leak ruins a foundation, invisible until the whole structure begins to shift. First, the silences, which she had told herself were simply tiredness. Then the small cruelties, which she had told herself were simply stress. Then the larger architecture of control, the checking of her phone, the comments about her friends, the way her own opinions began to feel like trespassing in a house she had helped build. By the time she understood what had happened, she was already inside it. And people who have never been inside something like that will sometimes ask why you didn't simply leave earlier, as though it is a simple matter of opening a door, not understanding that when you are inside, you cannot always see where the door is. She had a daughter, Lily June Garrett, 9 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness, and a laugh that had the structural properties of sunlight. It got into everything and changed the quality of a room. 3 weeks ago, on the morning of October the 27th, Kevin had presented Maggie with legal paperwork, prepared by a lawyer she had never known he was consulting, that resulted in her removal from the house she had lived in for 8 years. He had been planning it, the lawyer's papers made clear, for the better part of 6 months. Maggie had known things were bad. She had not known they were that organized. She had taken her clothes, Lily's winter coat, and a box of photographs. She had left the furniture because it was in his name. She had left the kitchen appliances because they were in his name. She had left 11 years of her life because she did not see another option that morning, and sometimes the only move available to you is the one straight ahead. Lily was currently staying with Maggie's mother, Margaret Calloway, in her small house in Kareen, 18 miles away, a house with a leaking bathroom faucet and an oil furnace that required coaxing every morning, and a small bedroom with a yellow quilt where Lily slept and drew pictures of horses and asked her grandmother questions that Alina answered as carefully and honestly as she could. Maggie spoke to Lily every night on the phone. She had not yet told her daughter that she did not know when they would have a place of their own again. Maggie had been sleeping on the pull-out sofa in the apartment of her friend Dana Perkins for 19 days. She had applied for 14 jobs. She had been rejected from 12 of them, heard nothing from the other 2, and was beginning to understand, the way you understand something that you already knew but didn't want to know, that the months ahead were going to require something from her that she hadn't yet found. She had seen the flyer for the auction taped to a telephone pole outside the BP station at the edge of town 2 days ago. It had taken her 20 minutes of standing in the cold to decide to come. She couldn't bid on anything, she knew that. The minimum opening bid on most units was $50, and she had 5. But standing still, she had discovered, was its own particular agony. Standing still meant thinking. And thinking meant calculating, over and over, a set of numbers that did not add up. So she had come, to stand at the edge of something, to watch, to be in motion, even if the motion was only the act of showing up. She was standing at the back of the cluster of bidders, her hands in her pockets, watching Harold Beaumont call out Unit 12, then Unit 17, then Unit 23, when something unexpected happened. Something small, something that would later look like the turning point of her entire life. Dale Pritchard had been buying storage units in southern Georgia for 22 years, and he moved through auction lots the way a doctor moves through a waiting room, efficiently, without sentiment, already forming conclusions before he had finished looking. He was 56 years old, heavyset, with the kind of ruddy, weathered face that comes from years of outdoor work, and the kind of easy confidence that comes from years of being right about things that other people don't understand as well as he does. He wore a John Deere cap and a fleece vest over a Carhartt shirt, and his truck, a black F-250 with a contractor's bed, was parked at the end of the lot with a flashlight and a pry bar, and a folding dolly inside because Dale always came prepared. He had a storage unit yard up in Tifton where he stored and sold what he found: furniture, tools, electronics, the occasional piece of jewelry. He had a good eye. He had turned that good eye into a decent living, and he was not shy about knowing it. He had walked each unit before the auction began, bending down to peer through the gap at the bottom of each door with his flashlight, taking mental notes. Unit 12 had a riding lawn mower and some power tools worth bidding on. Unit 17 had what looked like a home gym and several pieces of flat-pack furniture, worth $30, maybe $40. Unit 29 had nothing but garbage bags and old clothing. He'd let someone else take the loss on that one. He had paused for 3 seconds at Unit 49 and moved on. It was the worst unit in the lot. The ceiling inside showed old water damage, a long brown stain running from back to front that had the look of a problem nobody had addressed for a decade. The internal shelf had partially collapsed. The boxes visible through the gap at the bottom were soft with age, their corners gone mushy, their sides bowing. Whatever was inside had been there long enough not to be worth much. Dale had not even written the unit number down on his notepad. When Harold Beaumont reached Unit 49, the bidding was perfunctory. Harold opened at $50. Silence. He dropped to $25. More silence. He looked around the crowd with the mild, professional patience of a man who has seen this before. A couple of the other dealers crossed their arms and looked elsewhere. Dale Pritchard was writing something in his notepad. Harold Beaumont had been running storage auctions in this county for 16 years. He had a soft spot. He would have denied it if asked, but it was there, for people who showed up to these things with hope in their face and no real plan. He had seen Maggie Calloway standing at the back of the crowd for the last 40 minutes. He had noticed the way she looked at each unit as it came up and then looked away, quietly, like someone at a restaurant who already knows they can't afford anything on the menu. He looked at her now, then he looked back at Unit 49. $5, he said, into the cold morning air. His voice was quieter than the auctioneer's voice he'd been using all morning. Anybody got $5 for Unit 49, last chance before we skip it. He was not really expecting a bid. He was offering a door. Margaret Calloway raised her hand. Dale Pritchard glanced at her with the mild, involuntary contempt of someone who has already decided that a person doesn't belong somewhere, and then looked back at his notepad. He did not bid. He did not need to. The unit wasn't worth his time. Harold Beaumont brought his gavel down. "Sold," he said, $5. The crowd had mostly already moved on to Unit 51. Maggie stood alone in front of Unit 49 for a moment before she touched the handle. She had paid $3 for a new padlock. Harold had sold it to her from a cardboard box in his truck, the kind of quiet, unannounced kindness that certain people perform without calling attention to it, which left her with exactly $2 to her name. She held the key to the old lock, a small silver key that the previous owner had presumably handed over when they'd failed to pay their storage fees, and she looked at the door. She thought of Lily, she thought of the pull-out sofa, she thought of the 2 job applications she had not heard back from. Then she gripped the handle and pulled. The rust on the bottom track resisted. She pulled again, harder, and the door groaned, a long, low sound, almost organic, like something waking up after a very long sleep, and then released, rolling upward on its track with a mechanical clatter that echoed off the concrete walls and brought with it a breath of stale cedar-scented air that washed over her face like a memory of something she couldn't quite name. The November light fell into the unit in that long wedge of pale gold. She did not rush. She began at the front, working methodically, the way someone works when they want to be respectful, because whoever had owned these things had been a real person, with a real life, and Maggie knew what it was to have your belongings reduced to a line item in someone else's accounting. She would not be careless with them. The first box contained folded curtains, cream-colored, good quality ones, gone dusty and brittle at the folds. The second box contained a set of dishes, mismatched, the kind that accumulate in a kitchen over decades rather than arriving all at once from a store. Wrapped in newspaper inside the dish box was a small ceramic figurine of a blue heron, intact, its paintwork still vivid. She set it aside carefully. A third box near the floor contained a child's drawing in a plastic sleeve, a house with a bright yellow sun, the sun drawn with the particular confident inaccuracy of a child who has not yet learned to be self-conscious. Maggie looked at it for a long time. In the middle of the unit, under the collapsed shelf, she found a box of letters tied with kitchen twine, and a coffee can containing a small collection of foreign coins, and a framed photograph of a man and woman standing in front of what appeared to be the Georgia coast, the woman in a sleeveless dress, the man in shirt sleeves, both of them squinting a little into the sun and smiling in the easy, unconscious way that people smile when they do not know they are being photographed. She set these things aside. Then she reached the back corner and the wooden crate. It was heavier than it looked. She had to drag it forward on the concrete floor, the metal clasp scraping, the wood leaving a pale trail in the accumulated dust of years. The clasp was stiff with age, and she worked at it with her thumbnail, carefully, not wanting to damage whatever was inside, until it released with a sound like a small, definitive click. She lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, the cloth itself was a faded blue-green, the color of shallow coastal water, and felt like linen between her fingers were canvases. She could tell immediately that they were canvases. From the rigid wooden frames she could feel through the cloth, from the slight resistance of stretched fabric. She lifted the first one out and unwrapped it slowly, the cloth falling away in her lap. It was an oil painting, not a print, not a reproduction. An original. She could see the texture of the brushwork even in the low light, the places where paint had been layered, the slight topography of it, the way the light caught the edges of thick strokes. The image was abstract in places and precise in others. A coastline, she thought, at some particular hour of late afternoon, the light going amber and long. The color was extraordinary, not the obvious color of a sunset, but something more complicated, more true, the color of the actual light. She turned the canvas over. On the back, in small, careful letters, a name, a date, 1961. She could not quite read the name in the dimness. She carried the painting to the doorway and held it in the November light. She read the name. She stood very still. She went back into the unit. There were 7 paintings in the crate. She discovered 7 canvases, each wrapped in that same faded linen cloth, each with a name and a date on the back. All the same artist. Dates ranging from 1958 to 1967. Each one is different in subject and feeling, but all bear the same quality of light, that quality of a person who is not merely painting what they see, but painting what they understand about what they see. In the back of the unit behind the crate was a shoebox sealed with masking tape that had gone so brittle it barely held. Inside the shoebox were letters, personal letters, 20 or 30 of them, the handwriting across the decades shifting from young and urgent to measured and deliberate, and beneath the letters, a manila envelope, and inside the manila envelope, a document. It was a certificate of authenticity from the Sutton Gallery in Savannah, Georgia, dated March 1974. It described a specific oil painting, 30 by 42 inches, oil on stretched canvas, signed, and certified it as the original work of the artist whose name Maggie had just read on the back of 7 canvases. She sat down on the concrete floor of Unit 49. The auction was still going on behind her. She could hear Harold Beaumont's voice, distant and rhythmic, calling out a new unit number, and the murmur of the crowd, and the sound of gravel underfoot as people moved. She was aware of none of it in any meaningful sense. She was aware only of the certificate in her hands, and the paintings propped against the wall beside her, and the faded linen cloth in her lap, and the sound of her own breathing in the cold, quiet air of a storage unit in Harlan, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning in November. She knew the name on the certificate. Not intimately, she was not an art scholar, but her high school art teacher, a devoted woman named Mrs. Eubanks, had mentioned it once in a lecture on mid-century American painting, and the name had stayed with Maggie in the way that certain things stay, not because she had tried to remember it, but because something in the way Mrs. Eubanks said it had suggested that this was a name worth holding on to. She took out her phone. The screen was cracked in the lower right corner, a long diagonal fracture she'd had for 4 months because she couldn't afford to replace it. She searched the artist's name. The first result was an auction house record. A comparable painting, same period, same medium, same artist, had sold at a Sotheby's auction in Atlanta 14 months ago. The hammer price was $47,000. Maggie sat on the concrete floor of Unit 49 and did not move for a long time. She was still sitting there when Dale Pritchard's shadow fell across the entrance to the unit. He had been making his way back down the row of units, checking on what he'd won, when he glanced over and saw her. She was sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, with a painting propped against the wall in front of her, and a piece of paper in her hands, and her face had the particular color and expression of someone who has just been told something they cannot yet fully process. Dale was not a stupid man. He had learned over 22 years to read the body language of people who had found something. He walked over, he looked at the painting. His eyes went to the signature on the back, visible from where he stood. He looked at the certificate of authenticity in Maggie's hands. He did not let his face change. "You find something interesting," he said. Maggie looked up at him. "I'll give you $800, Dale said, cash for the whole unit as is." Maggie looked at the certificate. She looked at the painting. She thought about how $800 would pay for 3 months of the storage fee for a unit she could keep her things in. She thought about how $800 was 800 times more than she had had this morning. "No," she said. Dale's eyes went to the certificate again. He recalibrated something privately. $1,500, he said. "Right now, I've got the cash in the truck." $1,500. Maggie looked at it from the inside at the number, at what it meant. She could hear her daughter's voice on the phone last night, asking when they were going to live together again, and she had said soon, baby, soon, I promise, and Lily had said, okay, and had not asked any more questions because at 9 years old she was already learning to read her mother's silences. $1,500. Her grandfather, Arthur Calloway, had been a quiet man with large hands and a habit of saying things only once, on the understanding that anyone worth speaking to was paying close enough attention. He had said many things over the course of her childhood that had lodged themselves in her, but one in particular came to her now, on the concrete floor of a storage unit in November, with a man she didn't trust standing over her with cash in his truck. The first person to panic is always the one who walks away with nothing. She looked at Dale Pritchard. She stood up. She gathered the certificate carefully and placed it back in the manila envelope. She looked at the 7 paintings against the wall. "No," she said again. Dale's face changed. The mild, transactional pleasantness drained away, and what was left was something more businesslike and less warm. He told her, not unkindly but clearly, that she probably didn't know the first thing about navigating the art world, that she would get taken advantage of by the first gallery she walked into, that auction houses had fees that would eat half of whatever she thought she was going to get. That $1,500 in hand, right now, was worth considerably more than a theoretical number on a phone screen. He was not wrong about some of it. He was not wrong that the world she was about to enter was one she didn't know. But he was wrong about one essential thing, the thing his 22 years of professional experience had taught him to overlook, because in his experience it was rarely relevant. He was wrong about what she had already survived. Maggie Calloway rolled the door of Unit 49 down. She fitted the new padlock through the hasp and clicked it shut. She put the key in the front pocket of her jeans, next to the place where the $5 bill had been this morning. She thanked Dale Pritchard for his offer. She said it politely, the way her mother had raised her to be polite even to people who did not deserve it. Then she walked across the gravel lot to her 2003 Honda Civic, which had a cracked dashboard and one rear window that didn't roll all the way down anymore, and she sat in it with her hands on the wheel, and she breathed. She sat there for perhaps 10 minutes, then she took out her cracked phone and called her mother. "I need another week," she said, "maybe 2. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you all right?" Maggie looked out through the windshield at the row of corrugated metal doors, at the peeling gray paint, at the November sky above them, flat and pewter and enormous. "I think something just changed, Mom," she said. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it did." She drove back to Dana's apartment, and she sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper, and she began to make a list. The nearest university with an art department was Valdosta State, 41 miles away. She found the department's website on her phone and scrolled through faculty profiles until she found one that made her slow down and read more carefully. Dr. Patricia Osai, Associate Professor of Art History, specializing in mid-century American painting, Southern regionalism, and authentication of post-war works. Maggie photographed all 7 paintings carefully, front and back, in the good light by the storage unit the following morning, and she sent the photographs to Dr. Osai with a letter that she wrote 4 times before she got it right. Factual, not overwrought, detailed without claiming more than she knew. Dr. Osai's reply came 3 days later. The subject line was one word: extraordinary. The email itself was 3 paragraphs long and contained, in the second paragraph, a request to see the paintings in person, and in the third paragraph, a recommendation to contact a specific authentication specialist at an established auction house in Atlanta named Whitfield and Associates. What followed was 3 weeks of a kind of suspended animation, 3 weeks in which Maggie drove to Valdosta twice, to Atlanta once, to Savannah once, while making phone calls from parking lots and waiting rooms and the kitchen table of Dana's apartment after Dana had gone to sleep. She signed documents she read carefully, twice, before signing. She asked questions she wasn't sure were the right questions and discovered in the asking that they were often more right than she'd known. She drank a great deal of bad coffee from paper cups. The authentication process confirmed what Dr. Osa had suspected. The 7 paintings in the wooden crate in Unit 49 at Harlan Self-Storage were original works, in extraordinary condition, by an artist whose reputation had been growing steadily in the years since his death in 1991. The largest and most significant of the 7, a 36 by 48-inch landscape of the Georgia coast at dusk, painted in 1963, the year the artist had spent in Harlan as part of a fellowship, was valued by Whitfield and Associates at between $61,000 and $85,000. The other 6 paintings were valued at amounts ranging from $12,000 to $28,000 apiece. Maggie hired a lawyer. Her name was Renata Cruz, 31 years old, the daughter of a farm worker, and a woman who had put herself through law school by working nights at a distribution center, which was not information she led within professional settings but which Maggie somehow sensed, and which was part of why she trusted her. Renata worked on contingency. She also, in the course of their first meeting, asked 2 careful questions about Lily, and then, at the end of the meeting, offered to help Maggie file for a formal custody arrangement at the same time they were handling the art matters. She said she had done it before. She said it was not as complicated as it sounded. She looked at Maggie in a way that said, "I know what you've been carrying, and I know how to help you set some of it down." The auction of the 7 paintings took place on a Tuesday afternoon in early March, in a quiet, well-lit room at Whitfield and Associates in Atlanta, with about 40 people present. Maggie sat in the back row in a blazer she had borrowed from Dana, and she held Lily's hand. Lily had been told, in age-appropriate terms, that her mother had found some important paintings, and that today they were going to find out what happened next. Lily had asked if she could come, and Maggie had said yes because she wanted her daughter to see this, not the money, not the outcome, but the act itself. The act of a woman sitting in a room and waiting for the result of a decision she had made alone, with nothing, in a storage yard in November. The gavel came down on the final painting at $79,500. Total proceeds from all 7 paintings, $193,000. There were fees, auction house commissions, Renata's contingency percentage, a small tax matter that Renata helped her navigate. When it was over, Maggie had $141,000 in a bank account that had her name on it. The first check she wrote was to Valdosta General Hospital, her mother's medical debt, accumulated over 2 years from a cardiac event that Margaret Calloway had mentioned to her daughter only once and then not again, because Margaret had spent a lifetime not wanting to be a burden. Maggie had known. She had known for over a year, and had not been able to do anything about it, and had carried the knowing the way you carry something you have no place to set down. She wrote the check and called her mother and told her, and Margaret was quiet for so long that Maggie said, "Mom, are you there?" And Margaret said, "I'm here, baby, I'm here," in a voice that Maggie had not heard since she was very small. The second thing she did was make a deposit on a house. It was a small house, 3 bedrooms in the same school district as Lily's school, with a yard that had a pecan tree in the back corner and a covered porch in the front, and a kitchen with a window that faced east and caught the morning light. It needed a new coat of paint on the exterior, and the bathroom faucet dripped. The furnace was old but functional, and it was hers. She set aside a college fund for Lily. She set aside enough to breathe, genuinely breathe, without counting every dollar before she spent it, without the low-grade arithmetic of survival that had been running in the back of her mind like a machine she could not turn off. On a Saturday in late March, Maggie drove to her mother's house in Kareen and put Lily in the backseat of the 2003 Honda, which still had the cracked dashboard, because some things you change slowly, and drove 18 miles to Harlan, and pulled into the driveway of the small house with the pecan tree and the east-facing kitchen window, and turned off the engine.
"Is this it?" Lily said. "This is it," Maggie said.
Lily got out of the car and looked at the house for approximately 4 seconds, and then she ran through the front gate and up the porch steps and through the front door that Maggie had left unlocked, and Maggie could hear her footsteps through the empty rooms, rapid and light and utterly certain, the way children run through a space they have immediately decided belongs to them. Maggie stood in the kitchen. The afternoon light came through the east window at an angle, long and warm, the way it does in March when the season has just turned and the light has remembered what it's for. She held her key, the key to the front door of her own house. It was an ordinary key, brass, a little worn at the bow from being on the previous owner's keychain, and she held it in her palm and looked at it and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said better. From somewhere in the back of the house, her daughter laughed at something. The sound came through the empty rooms and found her in the kitchen, and it was the best sound she had ever heard. There is a version of this story that never happens. In that version, Margaret Calloway stands at the back of the crowd in that gravel lot in November and watches the auction proceed and goes home to Dana's pull-out sofa with $5 still in her pocket because she couldn't think of a reason to raise her hand. In that version, Dale Pritchard never glances at her because there is nothing to glance at. Harold Beaumont calls out Unit 49 and gets no bids and moves on, and the paintings wait in their wooden crate for another set of years, patient and indifferent, the way great things wait when no one is paying attention. That version is not the one that happened, but it is close. It is close enough that we should sit with it for a moment, because the distance between the version that happened and the version that didn't is no greater than the width of one raised hand. She raised her hand because she had nothing to lose. Or rather, and this is the important thing, because she understood on some level below words that having nothing to lose is not a disadvantage. It is a form of freedom. When you have nothing left to protect, you can move in any direction. You can raise your hand. You can open a door. You can sit on a concrete floor in a cold November morning with a painting you don't fully understand yet and decide that it might be worth understanding. She said no to Dale Pritchard, not because she was certain she was right. She was not certain of anything that morning. She said no because she had learned, from years of making choices from a place of fear, that the choices you make in a panic are rarely the ones that serve you. Her grandfather understood this. He had watched enough life to know that the first impulse to run, the one that screams take the money, take the safety, take the sure thing and go, is almost always the fear speaking. And fear, as a financial advisor, has a poor record. But here is the thing that matters most, and it is not about money. It is about the door. Unit 49 was the worst-looking unit in that lot. Water damage, collapsed shelf, boxes gone soft with age. It was the unit that the experienced eye passed over, the unit that the professional with the truck, the flashlight, and the 22 years of knowledge had already dismissed before the auction began. It was, by every visible measure, not worth opening. And yet, there is something that life does, sometimes, that resists our attempts to categorize and dismiss it. It hides its gifts inside its ugliest packages. It puts what matters most inside the thing that no one wants to look at. It places the painting worth $80,000 inside the crate in the back corner of the unit that everyone else has already walked away from. This is not a guarantee. Most damaged units are simply damaged. Most hard years are simply hard. Most $5 bids go nowhere. Maggie herself would tell you this. She has told Lily this many times in the years since because she does not want her daughter to think that the world is a machine for rewarding persistence with treasure. It is not always. It is sometimes. It was this time. What it always is this: the light gets in. Not because you are owed it, not because you have suffered enough to deserve it, but because you came, because you stood at the edge of the lot when every reasonable voice told you there was no reason to be there, because you did not let the arithmetic of your circumstances be the final word on what was possible, because when the door finally opened, you were standing in front of it. That wedge of pale gold light that fell into Unit 49 on a Tuesday morning in November, it had been waiting there, in the dark, for a very long time. All it needed was someone willing to pull the door open.